Today on Trad Takes, why I'm tired of the Monarchy discussion, and JD Vance plants some freedom seeds. All this and more on Trad Takes. Welcome to episode 13 of Trad Takes, hosted by the Traditionalists. Thank you again for joining me for yet another Lenten edition. I don't know what it is about being the 13th episode, but something tells me I need to find a burglar, or a burglar hobbit. Anyway, we'll start like we always do by reading my favorite comments from last week. Duke Rufus 5334 asks, so what's the actual difference between a dictatorship and a monarchy with a king? The king is generally a dictator, and throughout history usually a tyrant and not for the people, just like a dictator. Thank you for the comment, and I definitely understand where you're coming from. A lot of people in the traditionalist circles these days are very high on monarchy. And, it's usually Catholic monarchy, which I would argue is obviously the best form of monarchy. But to a certain extent, with a monarchy, you have many of the same elements you have with a dictatorship, which is a lot of concentrated power in one person. And generally, that throughout history has not worked well. We like to point to, a lot of the kingdoms in the Middle Ages, Catholic Spain, Catholic France, as look at all these great examples of these great monarchs. And I would say probably in the grand scheme of things in human history, that has been the exception, not the rule. And that you're right that oftentimes monarchies quickly become dictatorships. And I would say there's some difference between a monarchy and a dictatorship just in the words themselves and the implications that those words contain. Right? A monarchy typically is inherited power. There's a succession there. Whereas a dictatorship is typically someone taking power by force. So that's a difference, I would say. A monarchy tends to also have more of a symbolic power and less of an absolute power, as you see with dictators. And then finally, I think a lot of monarchies, or at least a lot of the good ones, had some checks and balances. You had the monarchs of Catholic Europe, who would often defer to the opinions or the guidance of their bishops or the Pope. And of course, you don't have that with a dictator. With a dictator, it's all about controlling the masses and keeping your power while fending off others who want to become dictators themselves and taking it from you. So I think there are differences, but at a high level, I see where you're coming from. I tend to be a little less pro-monarchy than a lot of my peers on this channel. And that's not because I'm against the idea of having a Catholic monarch. It's because the idea of having a Catholic monarch in modern times is a very theoretical proposition. There's no basis in reality. It's a very utopian viewpoint, which as a traditionalist and as a conservative, I understand that there is no utopia. There is no perfect situation, political or otherwise, in this fallen world. It's in the same vein as saying, well, I have a solution. I know how we fix society and fix humankind. Let's just make sure that no one ever sins again, and we'll all be angels and perfect, and then we'll have this great, wonderful utopia. Wishing or hoping for a Catholic monarch today is very much along those same lines. It's unrealistic and it's unachievable. Now, as a theoretical discussion point or a hypothetical question on what would be the best form of government, that's fine. I'm there for that. I understand that argument, and quite frankly, you could probably convince me that a Catholic monarchy would be the ideal situation. But that's only theoretical. We don't live in a theoretical world. We live in a fallen world. And as long as there are people gathered together in a society, those people will be sinners. And we will hurt ourselves, and we will hurt others, and we will hurt our society by our decisions and our choices. So the question is not, if everyone was Catholic and holy, what's the best form of government? The question is, in our current liberal, non-Catholic world, what is the form of society we can have that best allows the flourishing and the promotion of Catholicism? And at this point, it's not a monarchy. Even if you could snap your fingers and set up a powerful dictator-level monarch who is Catholic in the United States, what would happen? My guess is that it would look a lot like the French Revolution, and the state of the country afterwards would be worse than it is currently. Anyway, thank you, Duke Rufus, for setting me off on this tirade. I also wanted to read a comment from Aaron Alkema, 1284. This is on the topic of regulation that I discussed last week, and how I do think that regulation is going to be necessary in some cases. Aaron says, I am a safety professional, and I can say from experience that most regulatory agencies can be privatized and do much better work than any government entity. When true professionals band together, they can ensure high quality. This is what a medieval guild was, true professionals enforcing standards that benefited everyone. The real issue is the profit motive that dominates the economic landscape. Why should a company that is concerned with the bottom line care about the environment or employee safety? Unless there is a shared value of mutual benefit, you will need an outside force to ensure safe workplaces and environmental stewardship. I agree. Well said, and thank you for the comment. So I have not been following the news very carefully throughout most of Lent, but this week was especially bad. I did manage to see a couple things, and mostly the things I see are links sent to me by my wife or friends. And this first topic is a combination of the two things that everyone is probably sick of hearing me talk about because they're my two favorite things to talk about. And they are JD Vance and firearms. JD Vance in the race with Ron DeSantis to become my favorite politician has again taken the lead because he was captured on video having some range time with the Marines at the Marine Corps base Quantico. If this was a PR stunt, it was a very unpolished but effective one. The videos show JD Vance having the time of his life firing rounds into targets downrange. Shot after shot, you can see the spotter or hear the spotter say, "Hit," or "Headshot." Not only does JD love doing this, you can just see the smile on his face, but he's pretty darn good at it. And I guess that's expected. He's an ex-Marine. But this makes me very, very happy. One, because I get excited when I see anyone throwing lead downrange and want to do the same thing. Plant some freedom seeds. But two, it's great to see the second most powerful man in the country, and by extension, the world. It's good to see him know his way around a firearm, to enjoy the experience, and to very obviously bond with his fellow soldiers who were with him. It projects a strength and a competence that we haven't seen in the White House since... And I love it. So, sorry, Ron DeSantis. JD has once again taken the lead. It's a narrow lead, but he is again in the lead. And then there was some bad news that I heard. The Supreme Court upheld Biden's unconstitutional attempt to regulate so-called ghost guns using the ATF. It was a 7-2 Supreme Court decision. All three of the normally good justices that Trump appointed joined the Liberals, as did the squishy John Roberts, leaving only Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas voting against it. I've talked a little bit about ghost guns or unserialized firearms before, but I'll go into a little bit more detail just to help understand what this ruling means and how it affects the firearm industry. So with a lot of the modern rifles and pistols, the AR platform type of weapons, because they are very much like adult Lego sets, you can build it yourself, you can swap out parts, you can upgrade, you can personalize your rifle. But this made regulating it very hard, right? If you can buy all of the individual pieces and put it together into a weapon, how do you regulate and how do you serialize that? And the decision that had been made for quite some time, quite a long time ago, was that the lower receiver would be the official quote-unquote firearm. So you can buy, 50 different parts for your rifle, but that one part, the lower receiver, which is one of the most critical parts of the firearm, that's the one that's serialized, that's the one that's regulated, that's the one that you need a background check to purchase. For what it's worth, I disagree with serialization or regulation in any form, but assuming that regulation needs to happen, it was a reasonable enough decision to land on, as that lower receiver is the firearm. So fast forward a few years, and Americans being Americans came up with a very clever way to get around that. And that was building so-called 80% lowers. Now, an 80% lower is simply a lower receiver, that serialized critical part of the firearm, that is only 80% complete, hence the 80%. So it still requires some metal work, some drilling, some milling, and some other things that need to be done to it before it's a functioning lower receiver. But because that lower receiver was not completed, it was not technically a firearm, and therefore did not need to be serialized and did not need a background check or any type of regulation when it was being purchased. So you could purchase this 80% lower receiver just through the mail, not quite from Amazon, but similar type of thing. Finish it yourself. It takes a little bit of effort and a little bit of know-how to be able to do it. But once you do that, then you have a completed lower receiver. You can buy all of the other 50 parts for your rifle, and they are all unserialized and unregulated. And boom, you have a quote-unquote ghost gun, a gun that has no serial number, that is not registered in any way. So now fast forward again to the Biden administration. What he directed the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, to do was to regulate those 80% lowers as being a fully completed lower. Now, I'm giving a high-level overview here. There's a lot of nuance to this, such as the types of kits you can sell that make it easier to finish out those lowers, and the type of packages or bundles you can sell where you can have everything all in the same place and basically make it very easy to complete your gun, right? Just at a high level, I'm just kind of giving the overview. But what rightly happened was manufacturers of these 80% lowers sued, and it's been going through the courts now for almost 3 years, 2.5 years-ish. And it finally got up to the Supreme Court. They heard the oral arguments back in October of 2024, and just this week released their 7-2 decision saying that yes, because these kits make it easy to manufacture a firearm that's unserialized, the ATF should be able to regulate that in some way. So it's not a death blow to the Second Amendment, but it opens a can of worms. Because now what the court has said is the ATF has the ability to regulate these unserialized firearm parts, but it doesn't give any direction on where that line is. So we talked about that lower being 80% completed. I mean, at 0% completed, it's a chunk of aluminum. And then at 100% completed, it's a functioning lower receiver. where is that line drawn? Is it 50%? Is it 60%? Right? At some point, you're just going back to a chunk of aluminum. The whole thing is stupid, and it's frustrating to me that a quote-unquote conservative Supreme Court wouldn't see this as bad law. And not just bad law, but a slippery slope bad law that gives the ATF a lot more power than it should have. Always remember, shall not be infringed. That sound means we're all out of time for today. Thank you for listening to this special, shorter, and less professional edition, the Lenten edition of Trad Takes. Please like, share, and subscribe to The Traditionalists. Spread the word for my show, Trad Takes, or for any of the other shows hosted by The Traditionalists. And do remember to leave a comment. It could be the one I start off the next show with. This is Eric signing off. God bless you all, and God bless these United States of America.